Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Colton. I am joining you today with Voices of Calm. A huge thank you to Andrea Ems and Adam Barr for allowing me to be a part of this. I think in these chaotic times, it can be very good for us just to take a few minutes to breathe and escape and jump into a different world. And what better way to do that than with a great story from a great book, which is what I have for you today. I am reading the first book of the Hunted series, The Reapers, by the incredibly talented Allie Winters. So I'm going to read chapter 1 for you today. This book is all about the balance between life and death. It's a fast-paced fantasy world that Allie has created for us. The hero's name is Nivy. She's a Grim Reaper. So let's just jump in and get started. I can't wait for you to hear more about her. Chapter 1. Nivian. Nivian's hair whipped around her face as she stood on a bridge along a dark stretch of highway. The melodic splashing of the river's current below was the only sound in the still night. Moonlight gleamed upon the frosty earth, illuminating the dancing strands of her platinum blonde hair. A car swerved half a mile up the road as it raced towards the bridge. "Drunk and right on cue," Nivian muttered to herself, rolling her eyes at how cliché her mark was. She glanced over her shoulder and waved her hand, willing a thick sheet of ice to form on the deck of the bridge. Within seconds, the railing rusted, groaning under the weight of the structure as it became weak and brittle. The vehicle sped faster toward her. "It's time," Nivian thought, pulling the hood of her cloak over her head to shield her from sight. The tires screeched as they hit the slick surface of the road, skidding. Slamming on the brakes, the driver lost control. Crash! Plowing into the guardrail, the Mark's car smashed through the rusted metal and fell into the freezing river below with a splash. The car hit the water, and the driver's head struck the side window with a violent crack, knocking him unconscious. Water quickly invaded the car, forcing out the last of the air. Pushing her hood back to examine her work, Nivian's long tresses swirled across her face in the light breeze. "Nivy, you are such a show-off," a familiar voice teased behind her. "Oh, I don't know, Cammy. I think I was off just a smidge." Nivian turned to her friend, grinning as she leaned her hip against the guardrail. "Too much splash." Nivian continued to look down at the river below and knew, without looking, that Chimera wore a smirk on her face. Chimera walked up to her and looked over the railing of the bridge to the slowly sinking car. Pockets of air bubbled up to the surface as a grin formed on Nivian's lips, and she pretended to examine her nails, buffing them on her cloak in mock pride. For as long as she could remember, she had been friends with the timeless Reaper beside her. Nivian glanced at her out of the corner of her eye. Curly, mid-length hair flowed down her back in soft golden-brown waves, but the warm umber eyes that usually shone were dark tonight, her smile not reaching them. Rolling her eyes, Chimera shook her head and pulled herself up on the railing to sit, swinging her legs over the edge. "You have a big head. You know that, right?" Nivian nodded as the other Reaper's face turned serious. "Anyway, Caspian sent me to let you know he has another job for you. He wants you to go pick it up tonight." "Another one?" Chimera averted her eyes. "Yeah, Caspian has been piling them on lately. It seems to be that season." Nivian shrugged dismissively. "I'd better get to work." Nivian leaped over the edge of the bridge, her feet landing with a soft tap on the surface of the water. She reached down, pulled the sole of the driver up by the collar of his shirt, and stood him up next to her on top of the water. Taking the driver's hand, palm up in hers, she waved her other hand over him. As she pinched the air, she pulled and lifted upward, exposing his life thread. The Mark's wide eyes stared, unblinking and hypnotized by the glowing string of light. Nivian reached behind her and grabbed the scythe strapped to her back. And with a slow, deliberate swing of the blade, Nivian sliced the human's life thread. The light formed into a ball and hovered between them. She pulled out a small pocket watch and guided the life energy down to its face, where it sunk into the device and disappeared. Snapping the watch closed, she returned it to her pocket. "You should know better than to drink and drive. You could have seriously hurt someone." Her mark gaped at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Yes, you really are dead," she confirmed, knowing his unspoken question. She gave him an apathetic look and turned away. "Are you the devil?" he managed to sputter. "No, of course not. I'm just the natural order of things," she said, looking back over her shoulder to catch his fearful gaze. "Wait here. Your spirit counselor will come along shortly to guide you to your afterlife. I have other jobs tonight." She spun on her heel, pulling her hood back up over her head, and vanished into the night. Nivian transported to just outside the gates of the Graceful Reaping Incorporated Management Headquarters, also known as Grimm Headquarters. Its formidable single tower shot up over 26 stories high and ended in a 3-sided spire. The main door stood tall at well over 15 feet, chiseled out of obsidian glass, its facets gleaming. Windows lined the center of the building's front until they reached the top floor, where a single room with 3 larger arched windows looked out over Mofar. Tall golden gypsum crystals lined the sides of the dark Gothic building, reflecting the early morning light. Grimm headquarters sat on the edge of the precipice of Edrothli, surrounding all of Mofar. The precipice had depths as infinite as time itself, but it was impossible to know by looking at it. A thick layer of silver fog glittered, as though made from millions of crushed diamonds. The mists filled the vast depths, overflowing and gently sliding over the edge like waves of the ocean, blurring the cliff's end. Behind her stood the thick forest of Aerie, with its dark purple trees covered in red mosses that glowed with a soft pale bioluminescence. The sky was a perpetual morning, with lavender clouds scattered across, colored with the burning reds and oranges of a sunrise just seconds before the first rays of day broke the horizon line. Nivian walked through the entry into the center of operations. The black and silver gates were adorned with the symbol of the Reapers, a raven in flight, surrounded by an unbroken circle. The ancient arches were one of her favorite features, causing goosebumps to travel up her arms as she walked under them. Columns 17 feet high, with flying arches made of flawless volcanic stone, lined the path leading to the massive tower. Each column had intricate carvings, telling the history of the Reapers. Nivian walked down the long corridor to the great hall along floors of solid black marble, shining perfectly as they reflected the warm light. It took her breath away, and she loved to take her time, each moment precious as she walked through the corridor. She admired the carvings, telling the history of how, at the dawn of time, the Fates created the Tome of Fate, brought forth the Reapers, and gave them their scythes. Nivian scaled the tall flight of stairs to Caspian's office before knocking on the door. "Come in," a deep voice called from the other side. Pushing open the heavy door, Nivian stepped inside. Caspian sat behind a massive desk, the Tome of Fate lying open before him. The words swirled, forming on the pages in front of him. Closing the book, he glanced up as she stepped into the room. Long black hair pulled neatly back into a ponytail, tied at the base of his neck, he smiled warmly upon seeing her face. "Nivian." His black eyes sparkled, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "My lord," she said, bowing deeply on one knee. "I am ready for my next assignment." Caspian stood from his chair and walked around the desk, smiling as he lifted her up. Tilting her chin with his knuckle, he forced her to meet his black-as-night gaze.
Nivy, I've told you 1,000 times. There is no need to be so formal with me.
Yes, Caspian. Nivian lowered her eyes and stepped back, suddenly feeling nervous. The corner of his mouth lifted as he placed a hand on her shoulder. Here is my last mark, she said, retrieving the small watch out of her pocket and holding it up to Caspian as she kept her gaze locked firmly on the ground. After all this time, she had yet to conquer her timid nature when he teased. Abruptly, he took a step back and rounded his desk.
Excellent work, Nivian, as always.
Opening the tome again, he scanned the words, tracing a finger down the page. After finding the passage he needed, he wrote a name down on a small slip of paper and held it out to her.
Here is your next assignment. I think 1 week's time should be sufficient.
She reached out to take the slip of paper, pausing when he held on.
Let me know when it has been completed, he added softly, leaning in close.
Nivian's eyes grew wide as she finally lifted her gaze to meet his. They pulled at her with the gravity of a black hole. Mesmerized, she felt herself fall into them, slowly drawn into their dark depths.
"Oh, Caspian," Chimera sang as she bounded into the room, stopping short at the sight of them standing so close. The surprised expression on her face told Nivian that she thought more was going on than the reality of it.
Caspian let go of the paper and hastily drew his hand away. Nivian jerked back, his spell over her broken as she stepped from him and leaned against the bookcase embedded into the wall. Sucking in a few slow, deep breaths, she tried to shake the unnerving feeling of still being too close. It was oddly familiar, in a way, which struck her as unusual, since they were almost never so close. Chimera gaped openly at her, filling Nivian with a guilt she didn't understand. She turned away, hiding her face from her friend's questioning gaze. Taking a step back, Caspian casually leaned against his desk with his arms crossed.
"What can I do for you tonight, Chimera?"
His tone was flat, civil, and anything but warm. His question brought Chimera's eyes to his face. His question brought Chimera's eyes to his face, abandoning Nivian's form. While they talked, Nivian turned her back, pretending to study the titles on the bookcase, doing anything to become invisible and diminish the awkwardness that now filled the office. "My mock." She handed over the watch proudly, her fingers lingering over his. "I was able to finish early."
"Thank you, Chimera. I will have your next assignment ready for you in a few days' time."
He dismissed her. So intent on trying to ignore the tension in the room, Nivian missed the hurt look on Chimera's face as she whipped her head around and stormed out of the room. Chimera stepped close to Nivian once more, lifting his hand. Caspian stepped close to Nivian once more, lifting his hand in a familiar gesture as he absent-mindedly played with a lock of her hair.
"Let me know when you finish with this mark,"
he reminded her, taking a step back and moving to sit behind his desk once more. Nivian nodded and turned to leave.
"And, Nivian,"
he added. "Yes, Caspian." She bit her lip and looked back.
"This mark has a presence about her. Watch carefully, and please come to me if you need anything."
His mouth held a hint of a smile, but the tension around his eyes betrayed the outward light-hearted manner that he was attempting to portray. "I will, my lord." He raised an eyebrow, stopping her. "Caspian," she corrected, and returned his smile timidly as she turned to leave. Glancing back, she saw him watching her, amusement flickering in his eyes. He'd always had a relaxed and casual air in her presence. Mixed emotions surged through her. She didn't mind when he teased her in the friendly, almost affectionate way he did,
though Nivian usually walked away feeling as though she'd missed something important. Appearing in the alleyway next to her apartment building, Nivian threw back her hood and ran her hands through her hair. Her silver locks darkened to a rich auburn with golden caramel highlights, as the length shortened from its natural waist length to soft waves that fell to the middle of her back. Ice blue eyes shifted to a rich chocolate brown. Nivian grasped the scythe strapped to her back and watched it shrink from its 6-foot length to the size of a pin in her hand. Removing her cloak, she draped it over one arm, revealing dark fitted jeans and a black tank top, her usual reaping attire. Nivian shoved the scythe into her back pocket and fished for the key to her apartment. "What a long day," she muttered, stretching her arms over her head and yawning as she trudged up the steps to the main entrance. Nivian punched in the code to the lobby door and jogged up the stairs to her small apartment on the top floor. Nothing sounded better to her than taking a nice, long shower and then crawling into bed. Her days had slowly grown longer, with the amount of reapings coming back to back, when, in the past, they'd always been given at a steady pace. Before, there had been days between assignments, allowing her time to recoup and replenish her reserves. Cutting a life thread always took energy, temporarily lowering her power. Recently, Caspian had assigned an increasing number of marks more frequently. It seemed now as though every time she turned around, she had another assignment. It was odd how they picked up in frequency. The extra workload put more strain on her powers, making her weary. Thinking back, Caspian had acted differently when she dropped the watch off. It was difficult to pinpoint precisely what had changed in his demeanor, but when he smiled, there was a tension at the corner of his eyes. The routine they had, with his playful attitude and her shy responses to him, was normal. But it was clear this time that something bothered him. She could always tell when something was stirring underneath the surface. Nivian pursed her lips with doubt. No. If something had changed, others would have noticed. Silas would have noticed as well. Shaking her head, she dismissed the thought. Exhaustion had set in, and she was reading too much into a simple facial expression. Taking her assignment out and unfolding it, she read the slip of paper, wrinkling her forehead with confusion. The mark didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary, just a plain Jane, busybody lawyer. It should be easy enough, only requiring a few days, rather than the standard week she normally took to create a setup. She didn't understand why Caspian had warned her about it. Crumpling the slip into a tight ball with both hands, Nivian concentrated. The energy built up within her, flowing through every vein like a wave of electricity. Her powers compressed, merging with her assignment's energy signature and binding them together. The mark's fate was sealed. When she opened her hands, a small pocket watch sat ticking quietly, where the note with her mark's name had once lain. Nivian set it down on the small table in the corner next to her bed. She would worry about her mark in the morning. Her fingers brushed over the top of the watch. A strange energy, barely perceptible, but there, nonetheless, slithered up her arm and down her spine. She frowned, remembering Caspian's earlier warning. Her eyes narrowed. A strange presence about this mark, indeed. That is it for Chapter 1, so I'm going to save our place. I do hope I can come back and continue the story with you. It is just addicting and amazing. And again, thank you for joining me. Thank you so much for allowing me to have a small piece of your lives and your time to just jump into an exciting story. I wish everyone listening the best peace and love to you all, and I will see you soon. Thank you.